All right, we are back to Health Unlock, the power of salutogenesis with Jason. Jason, how are you?
Not too bad.
We had a little bit chat before this, so we are definitely warmed up for this topic.
Yes.
But as I was saying, this morning I saw literally a post on my feed on LinkedIn, somebody literally talking about this topic. So I was like, wow, okay. I was like, this is, we're on trend with that topic then. so, so today it's all about community as a medicine. We're going to dig deeper into this. And let's start with the first question here. So,
Well, actually, wait. Before we start, I do want to kind of on air apologize for if we're talking about community. The summer camps have started here, so it might get a little bit loud. I've got a noise cancellation thing, so you might not hear anything. But just so you know, there are lots of kids running around having lots of fun here at Eudaimonia, which is also where my office is. Um, And I've got a new computer setup here that's not perfect yet. So I apologize if it gets a little glitchy.
hopefully it doesn't, but I'm sure people won't mind a little bit of screams behind if that happens. So, summertime. All right, cool. So, Jason, so you've talked a lot about mitochondria and healing cycles on the cellular level, but today we are shifting the lenses. Okay. So, can you help us connect the dots with community and emotional well being?
Yeah. Okay. So I think that it starts with understanding that humans evolved as social creatures for sure. And we're wired to depend on each other for survival, not just emotionally, but biologically, right? So the biology comes first. The emotions actually develop later. And for most of our evolutionary history, being isolated meant that you were in significant danger. You're more likely to starve, get attacked, just basically lose your protection. So our brains evolved to be incredibly sensitive to our social environment and track things like trust and status and inclusion and threat at all times, right? Um, and you can you can see this encoded into our history, right? Every major culture has used social connection as a reward and isolation as punishment. In prisons, the worst punishment isn't actually violence; it's solitary confinement. Even mild chronic disconnection shows up in higher rates of disease and inflammation and even early death. And that's why really, this is why people talk about community. Um, well, actually, I guess people talk about community as a luxury, right? Um, and I kind of want to push back on that. It's not just a nice to have. It's actually it's ancestrally essential, and we're not meant to do life alone. And when we do, it really costs us. So this isn't just about mood or psychology. Our brain treats social disconnection as a real threat. And when the brain perceives a threat, it sends signals to the rest of the body. That's where this conversation really gets going and gets interesting, because it's social cues don't just change how we feel; they're actually changing how our cells function.
So, really, what you're saying is it's not just that community makes us feel better, it actually affects our cells, how they function.
Yeah, yeah, and it's more layered than people realize. It's not just that mood shift. The brain interprets social isolation as a survival threat and responds as if we're in actual physical danger. And that signal doesn't just stay in your head; it becomes a full body broadcast through the nervous system. Um, so you've got the nervous system, the endocrine system, and even the immune systems. So evolution selected for that sensitivity, right? People who survived were the ones whose brains reacted strongly to separation because that kept them close to the group. Um, and if if they wandered too far away, they didn't live long enough to pass on their genes. Now, I'm sure they did it at times, but one that lasted for a significant period of time. So take all of that, fast forward to today, and our brains still carry that wire. So even if we're physically safe, our nervous system starts sounding alarms when we feel isolated. Stress hormones go up, vagal tone, and then that drops, inflammation rises. And I guess here's where it gets a little bit more interesting. Body doesn't have, we've talked about this before, body doesn't have great systems for sending nutrients to specific tissues. It does have refined systems for sending neural and neuroimmune signals to specific places. So the brain maintains what's basically a somatic threat map. That's a prediction model of the body that flags certain regions or areas as more vulnerable. It's shaped by things like past injuries or trauma, chronic stress, even emotional associations. So when the brain enters a threat mode, those flagged regions, doesn't matter what they are, whether they're your gut, your jaw, lungs, an old injury site, they actually can get hit harder. They receive stronger neurosomatic danger signals, and the cells in those areas are more likely to be triggered into the CDR again and again, even if the original injury or issue is long gone. This creates chronic, localized immune activation, even when there's no current injury. And it's almost identical to what modern life looks like through other systemic triggers, like whatever, the novel toxins, poor sleep, processed food, all that kind of stuff. All of those are chronic low-level stressors. And the key point is those systemic that's hard to say. Systemic stressors act locally, but they're regulated globally by the brain. And I guess that's really what this episode's kind of all about. It's how the neuroimmune system governs the local immune system, and how community or lack thereof becomes kind of a lever to that. Right? So strong social ties send the signal that you're safe, and the brain eases back on its emergency settings, and then cells can kind of move forward. Conversely, isolation tells the brain you're not safe, and the brain responds by blocking resolution across the map, and or sending out these heightened threat signals. And that's why people in isolation kind of break down, right? Their bodies aren't healing properly, not because they're weak, but because their brains are doing exactly what they were designed to do in the absence of a tribe. And you can see how deeply some of this wiring goes when you kind of observe people in and how they behave in extreme isolation. Now, it might have been a movie, but if you remember the movie Castaway with Tom Hanks, the character actually creates an imaginary friend, Wilson the volleyball. And in the movie, it's kind of portrayed as an emotional survival tactic, but it's really deeper than that, or it would be if it were real. It's not just emotional or psychological, it's biological. The brain is kind of doing what it has to stay regulated. When we're completely cut off, the brain starts manufacturing connection any way it can, because connection is what tells it you're safe. And I guess maybe I should, as a reminder, the mind is a subset of the brain, right? So the brain is focused on immediate survival. The mind handles future survival. Excuse me. So thinking, planning, creating. So while isolation might actually feel okay to the mind for a while, you get to clear your head, get some perspective, that kind of stuff. However, if it continues too long, the brain now, not the mind, overrides that and says, yeah, you're not safe. You need your tribe. And then it starts doing whatever it can to get you to reconnect. Another example is that show Alone, the survival reality show. Those people they're trained and they have shelter and they're finding food. And still, many of them kind of tap out, not because of any physical hardship. Not to say that it's not hard, but they can handle that. They tap out because of the isolation. Even with whatever it is, $500,000 on the line, they kind of walk away. Not because they're weak, but because the brain reads isolation as a survival crisis, right? Another good example is that solitary confinement, right? In prison, that's considered the most extreme punishment. Not pain or injury, but isolation. And that's, I mean, so that's really how seriously the brain takes this. And that tells us something fairly powerful. The human body isn't just fighting hunger, cold, or infection. It's actually fighting isolation. And the brain still treats that as one of the most dangerous threats we can face.
It's kind of challenges the way we think that human beings so different because we can think, right? We can think. And do you think our ability to reason or that gives us an advantage when it comes to health?
So it absolutely can, but only if the mind is working with the brain, not against it. And so again, the brain is focused on immediate survival. It keeps, your heart beating, your lungs breathing. It's constantly kind of scanning for danger, real or perceived, by the way. And it's adjusting every system in your body based on what it thinks is happening right now. But it's not perfect. And the brain evolved in a kind of a completely different environment. Or our brains evolved there. We were in smaller social groups, whatever, predictable light patterns, fewer chronic stressors, and so forth. Now we live in a world of full of all sorts of new signals. Light pollution, social media, crowds of strangers, 24/7 news cycles, processed foods. We don't move around well, and we don't move around much. Brain doesn't always know what to make of all of these. And so it often overreacts, keeping us in that chronic low-level threat mode. This is where the mind, your reasoning, reflective self, can make a difference. It can say, this isn't a real threat. You're okay. I'm okay. It can remind us to breathe, reconnect, and even go and move correctly. It can focus attention on a specific healing priority that the brain might otherwise ignore. Remember, that is what the placebo effect is. It's the mind redirecting the brain's attention, saying, focus here. And that can happen, whether you're taking a placebo pill or you get a placebo surgery or anything. The mind knows what's supposed to be happening. And in many cases, that can activate the brain's ability to actually initiate the healing. Now, unfortunately, most people never really learn how to use their mind in this way. Instead, their minds become kind of chaotic, reactive, adding more noise, more worry, more perceived threats for the brain to process. And so in that case, the mind ends up, or our ability to think generally ends up being worse for our health than good for our health. But this is also why support systems matter so much. Calm, connected environment that feels supportive helps the brain dial down its alarm, which allows the mind to kind of regain this positive influence. So yeah, our ability to reason can be a major advantage, but like any tool, that depends on how we train it and how we use it, right?
And there are examples, right? Even I see it, like how you were saying support system, even for certain treatment types, we like always have those support groups, even in conventional medicine, we recommend that, right? Like, for example, somebody who has Parkinson's, they will have support groups. So and it's built into the system. So there is some truth to that it's related to this. We follow the same kind of things to create those community in and around people to help them heal in those ways, because it works in that way.
Yeah.
Uh, let's return to your path. So you founded Eudaimonia, and we were talking about this at the beginning when you told where you were, and years before the IAF. So what were you trying to do back then, and how does it tie into the idea of community healing?
Yeah. I apologize. I'm trying to set the sound here to make it so I can hear you well. Yeah. So eudaimonia really emerged from personal grief, right? After losing my parents to cancer, I felt this urge to not just fight disease, but to understand what makes people healthy in the first place. And I didn't really have the language yet for things like salutogenesis. I mean, I knew what it meant, but not really. Or the cell danger response. Actually, at the time, I'd probably never even heard of that. But I knew intuitively that we're not just missing treatments, we're missing environments that support healing. And initially, eudaimonia was very highly movement focused, right? I came from a medical device background, so my way into this was more mechanical, kind of through physical movement. And that's how I became interested in neurosomatic integration. It was all about, that specifically is all about helping the brain map the body correctly again so people can move better and feel better and heal better. And I guess, something surprising happened. Looking back on it, it doesn't seem as surprising. But as eudaimonia evolved, so did its community. Kids started showing up for sure, not just for movement, but for connection. Now, they probably refer to that just as fun, but they came. And then after that, we started getting more adults and then more families coming and supporting each other. And our programs grew into mentorship and emotional support and even peer education. Again, this wasn't top down. This was just kind of what happens when people start coming together and they feel safe and engaged. So even though it looked like a gym on the outside, and I mean, so it's an interfaith ministry, but if you walk into the main tabernacle, it looks like a gym for sure. But the real work really is kind of happening, and if we just start looking at kids, it's really happening more at the nervous system than anything else. Kids are calming down, adults are reconnecting, people are showing up differently in their bodies, their relationships, even how they handle stress. And I guess I don't know, my goal for it never really changed. It's always been the same. Create an environment that supports the body's healing processes, a salutogenic community, not with force or coercion, but by supporting the systems that actually know how to increase resilience. And when we give them the right inputs.
And of course, there might be many stories that have come out of that, right? So parents crying, kids thriving. What do you think is actually happening there?
Yeah, so I have told you about this before, and honestly, these stories do mean a lot to me, but they're also not just emotional wins; they are biological ones. Yeah, right. When a parent tells me that their kids' grades shot up, or they're sleeping better, or they're not melting down as much anymore, that's not just a personality shift. That's actually the nervous system finally getting what it needs. And so in that case, right, the kids aren't broken. They're more overloaded. Their brains have been living in this defensive mode and is stuck triggering the CDR pattern where everything is a threat. Everything's this noise. When they come into an environment that has structure, support, and safety, first and foremost, again, they might just call this fun. Their system then can recalibrate, and the brains can finally say, okay, the threat load is down. Now, that doesn't guarantee healing, but it reduces the pressure of that repeated CDR triggering, especially in areas of the brain uh, that that it already sees as vulnerable. So it's not that the CDR can't resolve; it's that the system never stops getting signal for danger long enough for it to really go through the entire healing process. And remember, the healing process and the growth process are the same thing, just at different intensities. And I guess that's key, because it's not just about whether the cells can complete the CDR. We talk about CDR persistence a lot here, where the CDR progression stalls. That's not where where everything starts. Dysfunction starts earlier than that, when the same tissues get hit with repeated triggers faster than they can adapt. Immunity doesn't necessarily fix everything, but it slows down the threat signals enough so that healing may become viable. That gives the body a chance to shift from protection to repair, to make growth biologically viable again. Right? Executive function improves, emotional regulation can return, the kids can end up being less fidgety or reactive. They don't shut down, not because we taught them to behave, but because we removed the threat signals that were kind of just jamming the system. So yeah, rates go up, confidence comes back, social skills start to click better. And but what's really happening is their biology is just resolving this kind of danger posture, and that truly is salutogenesis in action. It's just happening through movement and focus and coordination. It's the same model that we talk about at the cellular level, but I guess kind of lived out in a kid's nervous system. And I was focusing on the kids a lot now because summer camps are going on, but we can take that and we could throw adults or families in, or young adults. That doesn't have to be kids.
People. Yeah. Okay. And this reminds me of the blue zones, and these aren't places with the best medicine, but they are the places with the best culture, right? And do you think they have accidentally tapped into the same kind of principles?
Oh, sure, 100%. So blue zones are basically kind of the original healing context, right? Just preserved by culture instead of medicine. You've got natural movement built into daily life, low chronic stressors, strong community ties, all this kind of stuff, shared meals, multi-generational homes. Um, so in our discussion leading up to this episode, you mentioned large community of Seventh-day Adventists. That's hard for me to say. In Loma Linda, California, as kind of a remarkable example. And so they've intentionally avoided a lot of what kind of defines the modern lifestyle, and it sort of shows, right? Their lives are built around regular gathering. I guess that's, their worship, acts of service, daily movement, low stress living. And they pulled this off in California, which is not exactly a bastion of healthy social community. Though social conformity does seem to be pretty heavily practiced there. And what's remarkable is that their health outcomes aren't the result of these cutting edge interventions or optimization hacks, which are happening a lot in California. And so they're more the result of this cultural coherence and predictable rhythms and kind of relationship safety, all of which help the neuroimmune system downshift and let healing happen. So it wasn't kind of about, this one hero biohacking their way to longevity. It's about the whole community living in a way that supported the body's built-in intelligence. And California is kind of known as very health conscious. So if you can take, and doing all sorts of biohacking and all this kind of stuff, you can take a group out of, also within that area and say, hey, this group isn't doing all of that stuff, but they've got the community part really dialed in, and they're the ones that are actually remarkable here, not all the biohackers. That actually says a lot, right? Um, And you could also say that these aren't just lifestyle choices, they're actually cellular inputs, which shape how the nervous system behaves, how mitochondria respond, which we talk about a ton, how the cell danger response gets triggered, or better yet, how easily it resolves. Um, Now, that's it. None of the blue zones really are these perfect societies, right? They've just preserved enough of the core signals, the ones that tell the body that it's safe, or the brain that it's safe, so that people can age more slowly due to, really, that's reduced creation of those senescent cells. They stay healthier because they recover better. And what we're doing now with the CDR model that we talk about a lot is really just kind of giving language to what traditional cultures arrived at through lived experience. They didn't like optimize for biology. They lived in alignment with it because didn't, their environments didn't let them do otherwise, really, right? Over generations, the patterns that supported health, like connection and movement and shared whole food, traditionally prepared meals, those stuck around because they actually worked. So they didn't need to know the term salutogenesis to practice it. They just kind of built their lives around what felt right, and their biology rewarded them for it. And so today, uh, conversely, with so many of our kind of modern inputs working against that biology, I guess that's at Eudaimonia, we're trying to rebuild those conditions intentionally this time.
This is an interesting point because so let's say someone is listening to this in a city, right? Working a desk job, feeling isolated, right? And this happened a lot after COVID. So and now we work like that more or less. So is it enough to join a walking group or go to church or I don't know, join some other group activity? What would you say to that person?
I'd say yes, absolutely. That actually matters more than you think. So the body doesn't need a perfect environment to start healing. It needs a supportive one. And in the case of chronic stress from isolation specifically, what it really needs is enough connection to calm the nervous system down and reduce that inappropriate threat signal. So, joining a walking group, attending church, even meeting up with a few friends, those things aren't superficial. They help reduce the intensity of the brain's threat signaling, especially in areas it perceives as vulnerable, right? And actually, I apologize. I'm going to back up here a little bit. I'm afraid that I didn't describe what the brain's threat map is well enough. So it can be a little bit theoretical here. So I'll give you a couple of quick examples, personal here. So I had bronchitis shortly after I was born. And so I was a little bit more susceptible to respiratory things growing up. This likely wasn't due to some poor healing when I was an infant. It was simply that my brain mapped my lungs, that area, as a potential vulnerability. And therefore, whenever there were minor signals that it would receive from my lungs, it would freak out or it would respond more heavily. Now, over time, that's changed. And for example, I don't know if this is a great example, but I just performed a VO2 max testing not too long ago. And this is after not really doing a lot for the last few years. I'm not nearly in as good a shape as I think I should be. Pretty much the only thing I've been doing is I play volleyball a lot. And honestly, volleyball is not It's not really a sport that's good for you. I like it a lot. I have lots of fun. But it's lots of abnormal movements that aren't very good for your body. And I never really get tired doing it because, you do something really fast, but then you get to stop and rest for a bit. But my VO2 max, testing came out as excellent. Which means for me to try and make it better, it's going to be that much harder. So it looks like my lungs have gotten to be less of a heightened threat within my brain. Here's another example. So I snapped my ankles playing volleyball a bunch when I was younger, and to this day, they're still on my brain's threat map. If I move my ankle in the same kind of orientation that I rolled it multiple times years ago, I instantly start sweating. My coordination drops. Basically, systemic threat signals are initiated across my body. So while a single occurrence of trauma can immediately kind of embed a new spot into your brain's threat map, it seems to take a really long time to remove vulnerability. I might have done it for my legs, but I'm still working on it for my ankle. But so that's what I mean by the brain's threat map. In me, my brain thinks my ankle's a really big deal, and it used to think that my lungs were a really big deal. I haven't rolled my ankle since college, so that was a long time ago. There's nothing wrong with it. I can actually, when I take my ankle into an orientation where I did not roll it, and I give it the exact same input by rolling the ankle, but not hurting the ankle. I apologize. I'm using the same words to describe two different things here. That actually sends a signal to my brain, and my brain can say, oh, hey, there's nothing wrong with the ankle. And that immediately lowers my systemic threat level and increases my ability to perform. And it's fairly dramatic. And I can illustrate that with range of motion, visual acuity, cognition, all sorts of things. So let's return. So a supportive social group can reduce the intensity of the brain's threat signal, which is crucial because most chronic disease starts locally, as we've discussed. And it's the mismatch between the local needs and the global signals, especially from the neuroimmune layer. That's where lots of this starts. And when that happens, you get, or when you can correct the mismatch, you get fewer unnecessary CDR triggers. That's often enough to reduce the systemic noise that's jamming the body's ability to more adequately coordinate healing in the first place. And it's important to remember healing isn't blocked because the CDR can't resolve all the time. I know that that's the way that we made it sound with the first many episodes explaining this. It's often blocked because the neuroimmune system keeps telling vulnerable tissues that they're under threat, even when it shouldn't. Now, would that correct by itself? Would that correct the local nutrient deficiency or local immune fatigue that we've discussed? Probably not. In some cases, it might be just enough to tip the system back toward healing. However, in kind of every case, it makes it much more likely that other inputs, such as nutrition or rest or targeted therapeutics even, can be more effective. So yes, community helps. I'm going to keep coming back to that. It specifically helps the brain signal more appropriately. And that's what makes it salutogenic as well. It's not some magic signal that heals you. It actually stops making things worse. And you don't need a full-on blue zone. You just need a supportive community to help modulate proper levels of neuroimmune regulation. And this brings up something that might sound really silly. What is actually biologically plausible? Remember, the brain responds to perceived threats and perceived connection. So artificial forms of social interaction, whether that's an AI companion or a supportive chatbot or an AI therapist, they might actually be doing far more than we give them credit for. Because once the interaction passes kind of the brain's social filter, it doesn't matter that friend or that support is digital. The brain interprets it as real community support. The neuroimmune layer can then begin dialing down its signal. Uh, Kind of a quick aside, you could flip that around also and say that's also why the negativity on social media can be so damaging. If the brain is convinced that social media is our, put it in little finger quotes, our important group or our important social group, then rejection there will be just as damaging as if it is in person. The brain doesn't see a difference. And I know lots of people are like talking about this with kids and, oh, it's because kids' brains aren't fully developed. That's not true. I mean, that might be true, but that's not the primary problem. The primary problem is it doesn't matter whether you're a kid or an adult. If you see that social group as, if the brain sees that social group as important, rejection there is the exact same thing. The brain doesn't differentiate. So, if we go back to the positive side, I guess, virtual support isn't going to be perfect. We do still need physical presence and touch, which AI can't really provide yet. Um, but from a signaling standpoint, for sure, the brain's perception is what counts and the mind's skepticism doesn't. So really, once AI hits that whatever Turing level believability, if it hasn't already, which it might have, we might find it becomes a surprisingly useful piece in this kind of community health puzzle. I guess at least until we get robot girlfriends, like in what were those movies? Her or Ex Machina?
Yeah. It's, I feel like the biohacking, we touched upon it. It seems like the biggest biohack is community. it's, it's the,
Yeah, sure. And
yeah,
it shouldn't seem like a biohack, but in many cases, it's actually something that we have to go out and search for and add back into our lives for sure.
yeah. And a lot of time I also see that, and I don't know, this is just after listening to you today, just a thought that I see a lot of, biohacking people who are into biohacking, they do a lot of community stuff, as in like in a group activity a lot. So I wonder if that's it's the cause effect is actually something else. The community thing is actually healing much more than actual biohacks, but because it happens in more group settings. who
That's
not
actually a really good point. And to be honest, that's probably a huge confounding variable that very few people are looking at. You're right. And I mean, to be honest, let's take, I don't want to get in trouble with anybody, but like, there is a athletic practice that has become very popular in the last few years where you're doing Olympic lifts and all sorts of things. I won't say it. Um, a lot of that people are having great results from. A lot of it's fairly extreme and not necessarily great for you. But maybe a lot of the benefit coming from it is it's got a really strong community behind it. So you're right.
Yeah, there's something there. I need to dig into that now after this discussion. So, one final question. So you have gone from obviously being a medical device engineer to now wellness innovator to biotech disruptor through eyeball and everything that you're building with IAF, everything involved. What do you, why do you keep coming back to community? It seems like there's this theme there.
Yeah. So I'm going to try and turn down the noise canceling. Can you hear any of this?
No, I just hear you.
Okay. So I hear lots of kids kind of running around and having a lot of fun in the background here. Um, thought it was relevant. So I guess to answer that, because in the end, this is real medicine, right? The brain constantly aggregates threat signals from all directions, whether it's social, metabolic, emotional, and only when that load drops below a certain kind of threshold will it begin prioritizing healing processes. And it doesn't just make that decision based on whether we're safe, but we've been talking about that a lot. It kind of adds up all of these signals: pain, isolation, stress, injury, nutrient depletion, all sorts of stuff, and calculates whether defense or repair is the right action. Now, some of these things are very specific to individuals. As an example, if I put my ankle directly under my body and give it that, I shouldn't do it now, I'm doing it, and then it immediately makes me start to sweat and everything. But so if I do that, we can look at that. Yeah, that's not a huge deal. But my brain sees that as a really big deal. Yours might not, even if you've rolled your ankle before. So everyone's brain is going to be a little bit different on what it thinks is filling up its threat bucket, right? That's a good way of thinking about this. And all of these stressors kind of fill into this bucket. And once you get to a certain point, your brain won't handle it anymore. And your brain is going to start not spitting out the signals that help you heal. It's actually going to start spitting out signals that will make you feel more pain, reduce coordination, basically trying to get you to change your behavior so that some of these stressors go away. And I guess that's why chronic social stress can be so dangerous. It may seem minor, but to the brain, remember, isolation is a very high-weighted threat. And when you combine that with physical or metabolic stressors, the total threat load pushes the system into overdrive, ramping up neuroimmune signaling and triggering the CDR too often, especially in those vulnerable tissues that your threat map. So it's not that healing can't happen without calm. It's that healing really only gets the green light if the neuroimmune system believes it's the best course of action for right now. And that decision point, it depends on the total load of the threat signals, not just one factor. And again, the problem isn't just unresolved CDR. It's that repeated CDR activation outpaces the system's ability to complete the healing cycle. And for that, we need the signaling across all layers of the immune system to be coordinated. That's what salutogenesis is really about, supporting the body's communication system instead of trying to override it. And that's the difference between what we're doing and what conventional medicine has become, really. Again, most drugs today are cratogenic. They force or inhibit, I guess, a reaction, regardless of what the system's trying to do. And that kind of interference, it might suppress symptoms for sure, but it can also introduce conflicting instructions that confuse or even shut down the body's natural processes. Salutogenic therapies, like what we're building with ion biotechnology, are about enabling, not forcing. And just as importantly, I suppose, the environment we build around that therapy matters. Because neuroimmune signals aren't coming from a vacuum. They're constantly being shaped by context. And that's kind of been the constant thread from Eudaimonia to Ionic Alliance Foundation. We want the body to heal. Make sure that its messages are clear, aligned, and coherent. And that's what a supportive community really does. That's what Genesis does. And I guess that's what I've dedicated myself to trying to improve, is community salutogenesis.
All right. So on that note, we will conclude today's conversation, but the message is loud and clear. Community is the real medicine. Tech won't help without safety and purpose. That's what it is. And it all comes down to really, healing always starts local. Like that's kind of how you're putting that out too. Um, and once again, this has been super insightful, and I think it gave me a lot of food for thought to think even beyond it, the things that actually work, and how we might be, kind of giving credits to the wrong things, but actually the other thing, community plays a bigger role than other things maybe. And now I might actually go into that rabbit hole after after this discussion to discover it. Um,
And
yeah,
I'll admit, I am trying all these different biohacking things as well. Um, Potentially I'm healthier than lots of people, in which case I might not notice as much improvement, but there are lots of things that I don't notice much, like, taking, CBD products. Never really noticed it. Lots of different nutritional products. I'm not really noticing much. I can look at that and intellectually say, yeah, but my body probably needs to, I prefer to make sure that I'm getting all of these things. So I'll keep trying it. Um, might also be a thing, especially like with all the MOCO protocols and all that kind of stuff, might be a thing where they help keep me as healthy as I am. And it's also, I guess I do use the eyeball products a lot. Probably more than just about anybody else in the world. And that might be doing more to, to my mitochondrial function throughout my body, that it keeps everything working a lot better than it otherwise would, especially based on how little I had been exercising in the past few years before kind of starting this whole, new trying to get back in shape and everything. It's possible.
yeah. All right. Once again, great episode, great conversation. Thanks for your time. And as usual, to our listeners, come back, listen to more, keep us, ask questions, send us your questions. Sometimes we receive really interesting inquiries, and Jason will try to answer all of them if it's relevant. And keep supporting our cause. We need more listeners, more people to spread the word, and especially, like I said, we need community to even thrive and make this a real dream, and maybe to even eliminate these cancers and diseases from the world.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. I think I am going to try and create a virtual community around this as much as we can. I think
Sounds
that's a great idea.
sounds like right timing to get it going. It's and to be honest, you're already running different kind of communities through. Right now, you have so many kids behind you that we can't hear it, but you're telling us. so you already have those communities running there. So obviously, I think we need something for on this side, salutogenic world too, to create.
But these are smaller communities, right? Tens to, into the hundreds would be a lot.
Yeah,
There have been hundreds of people through here, but I can't necessarily say that there are hundreds of people within the community here. But, an online virtual community could get into the thousands to tens of thousands fairly easily. And I think that should be the goal.
okay, yeah, let's do it. That's my word.
All right.
All right. Cool. Once again, thanks for your time, Jason. Appreciate you. Thank you so much.